Welcome to the Concrete Solutions Network.
Good morning and welcome back to the Concrete Solutions Network. I'm Chris Kader, your host, and on today's session we are going to talk about the topic of mockups and their importance. And with us to do that this morning is Jake Holland of Summit Sealants out of Englewood, Colorado. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. What we're going to do today in this mock-up topic is we're going to cover some of the more technically related aspects of the mock-ups. So mock-ups are, in my opinion, and Jake, I'm sure you could share the same sentiments, they're worth their weight in gold, so to speak, because what they'll do is they'll kind of predictively forecast and in an educated fashion give the client an idea as to what they can expect. And you can establish metrics for scaling the rest of a larger size job. You can establish for your own self as the installer, and I'm sure you can talk a little bit about that here in a second, some of the materials and tools you'll actually wind up using after exploring a little bit and performing a mock-up on any given job that's set to go. So Jake, I'll turn it over to you. Again, thanks for being on the show. And just in your experiences doing this, especially with blindside chemical grout injection, give us, if you could please, Jake, some of the experiences you've had as to why it's important to establish the idea and get the client to buy into doing a predictive mock-up.
Yeah, so thanks again for having me, Chris. I think you hit it on the head. The mock-up is worth its weight in gold, and I constantly preach management of expectations, and that's the expectations of the owner as well as the expectations that we have as the installer throughout that installing application of the material, and knowing where our placement's going to be, what kind of travel we're having in the material. You know, do we need a low viscosity, super low viscosity? Do we need to cut it because the soils are absorbing a lot of it, and so we need to control our cure times and blow it back into the soil? And the mock-ups really tell you everything that you need to know throughout that process to make sure that when you expand it to the full application of the project, that you're achieving the results that you've told the ownership group that you can achieve, and not set a false expectation, but a controlled expectation for both the owner and yourself. And as you know, that's key, because that's the basis of the reputation of the material, the contractor, and the supplier all working together to meet the expectation that's been sold to the ownership group.
Yeah, no, very good points, Jake, for sure. In terms of the patterns, for example, on a blindside injection, it's different, obviously, than crack injection. There's a different setup as the installer that you need to establish with respect to your port spacing. If you don't mind speaking a little bit about some of the actual distances and different types of varied setups that you could do and use on a blind side. What have been some of your experiences there, Jake?
So, you know, there's the diamond pattern, which is just as it sounds, right? You basically place your ports in the shape of a diamond across the wall. And, you know, personally, I like to start out at like 18 inches on center as it relates to that port placement, and then have and that's horizontal. And then from your vertical application, your next port would be right in the middle of that 18 inches on center. Yeah. And that allows a little bit of the pancake pattern, if you want to call it that, on the back side of the wall to really intersect. The reason I like starting personally at 18 inches is because traditionally we're going to get that 18-inch travel on the back side of the wall. But what I can usually tell immediately with that 18-inch pattern is I'm looking for that port-to-port movement on the wall. And if I can get the travel to pass 2 or 3 ports, that's now telling me, 1, my pressure is on, 2, I'm getting phenomenal travel. And this is just another reason why this mock-up is so important, is because now I know, hey, I can go 24 inches to 36 inches on center.
Yeah.
With my diamond pattern, I'm reducing the cost to the owner. I'm reducing labor necessary for the job, and I know I've got the right material because I'm getting that port-to-port travel.
Yep.
You know, you can also do the square pattern, and traditionally, if you start to get that great movement starting with that diamond pattern, you could really just go to the square pattern because you know that you're getting phenomenal travel there.
Got it.
And so that's traditionally how we like to look at it throughout the mock-ups. And that's really kind of the two major patterns is the square and the diamond pattern. Traditionally, like I said, we start with the diamond pattern and we check our flow rates. It has happened where I haven't even gotten port-to-port movement on an 18-inch on-center diamond pattern.
Wow.
And we've had to reduce that to an 8-inch on-center diamond pattern. And that kind of goes into what your substrates and your soils and compaction rates on the backside of the wall are. If you're injecting into the soil and you have a low compaction in the soil, you have a very angular gravel on the backside of that, you're not going to get phenomenal movement. And what we've found is traditionally we almost have to double inject each one of those ports, right? Come in, we need to blow a cut back into that soil, cure it extremely fast, but at a very low viscosity so that we get good travel into it. So that way we're not just dumping material into the soil and the gravel. And then come back, once you've blown that, come back now and hit it again with a super low viscosity that's going to have that pressure up against the wall, forcing it now to travel laterally, vertically, and we get that pattern now that we're looking for. If we can get in between like a bentonite waterproofing that was attached to like a lagging system on the backside of that wall, and we can drill our ports but not blow through that waterproofing system, then traditionally we found we get phenomenal travel at that layer because we already have the pressure of that waterproofing now imposing its force up against our grout, causing that lateral and vertical migration of the material to occur.
Like a backstop of sorts pushing back on us, Jake.
Absolutely.
Some amazing points there. And for listeners out there, Jake touches on something that I really like, kind of rewinding to the beginning of what you were talking about. It establishes transparency and it ties into that idea of not drawing a line in the sand. It's us against the client. It's nonsense to have that kind of mindset. And too often, at least in my experience, Jake, and I'm sure you can share these sentiments, you wind up in meetings where it's an us and them mentality. And I think what a mock-up does is it serves as a bit of a ubiquitous and a common thread for everybody on the job to be in on it together. Like you approach it as a team and you start establishing trust with the end user. And I think it's, like I said, it's extremely valuable. Awesome points, Jake. Not to dwell on it, but definitely to throw it out there. Packers themselves, okay, mechanical packers, and for listeners out there, these are the ports through which you inject the material through the substrate and ultimately to the backside of the wall. Sizing on those, Jake, in your experience, talk a little bit, if you could, please, on the diameter of the packers, the length, and why as you go through a mock-up process.
So if we were talking, about 15 years ago, it would have been that standard 5/8 packer. They weren't even really using the Zerk fittings all that much back then. And that's really what we did day in and day out. And nowadays, with the Zerk fitting, I don't ever see a need really to go above the 3/8 inch packer. I mean, maybe if the reality is with the Zerk fitting, there's just no need in my mind. That old 5/8 hole that you got to come back and fill and repair and take care of just isn't necessary anymore. So at least in-house here, we pretty much stick with the 3/8 inch Zerk fitting packers. They work phenomenal. We've been able to take those to great pressure. Little in-house trick that we use, a lot of people will just pack those in and screw them tight. We've actually gotten into the habit of actually dipping them into the grout prior to actually putting them into the wall.
Yeah.
The grout activates inside and then just provides us an additional seal at that point in time. And we've achieved some pretty phenomenal pressures and are able to get phenomenal travel through that 3/8 inch packer. I know that there's a ton of options out there. We've played with a lot of them, but at the end of the day, the 5/8 inch packer, you just don't need that annular space anymore, especially considering you're going through the Zerk. You're going to spend more time drilling at that point in time because you're trying to get a bigger bit through the wall. So the 3/8 has been a phenomenal option. It performs phenomenally, and you're able to achieve the PSIs necessary to move that grout.
That's terrific, Jake. I appreciate that insight. That is good. Something too that's interesting. We touched on viscosities, and that's certainly important. You want to have something that's thin and has the ability in that planar form to travel on the back side of that wall. Phobic philic. This is something that I enjoy, and it kind of brings a bit of a smile to my face when guys ask the differences and when to use which, because I think a lot of times people mix it up. So when doing a mock-up, obviously you and I know this, but for listeners out there, your choice between a philic and a phobic, Jake, as it relates to a performance mock-up and a predictive mock-up, what do you have to say about that?
Well, this can go a lot further too. We can go into stabilizers, and then you really need to evaluate your environment, right? Are you in the water table? Are you not in the water table? What are your dry out patterns going to be? Do you have a dry out pattern? And that ultimately is going to decide which grouts you're going to be using. Colorado, we have some extremely wet months, and then we receive all of our moisture, it seems like, within 2 months out of the year. Those 2 months are spread out by about 4 months. So we go through these extreme wetting and drying cycles.
Gotcha.
And so the phobics traditionally work great for us, acrylates as well. Mm-hmm. But, one thing that you and I have talked about, Chris, is the latex modifications to make sure that when we go through these drying cycles, that the grout itself back behind the wall, even if it dries out with the soil and doesn't see moisture for 2 or 3 months, is still a stable product that doesn't shrink out back behind the wall, creating potentially a reoccurring issue that we were really hired in the first place to solve. So evaluating those needs is really going to help you pick whether you're going philic or phobic. In Seattle, once again, totally different market. The other thing for us in Seattle is 98% of what we do is going to be in the water table. And so that then adjusts, once again, what products we're using. The acrylates have hit the market hard, and they've really changed our industry to the point where even iCry has had to, look at adjusting their briefs, the 710E grouting briefs, because of the acrylates coming into the market with such a strong force because of how stable those grouts really are.
Europe has been really showcasing acrylates for decades, and that's because of some of the materials that a lot of what's out there and built in Europe are made of. You get several wides of bricks put together to make up these big walls that have been around for hundreds, literally, of years, where the acrylates are super thin and have to get inside and permeate and lock in within the substrate. I digress. This is, but all great points here. This is all good about the acrylates, and we can certainly cover that on another episode. Moving forward a little bit now. So you've shot everything, you've injected, okay, great. Now we're at a point where the things have cured out, and now it's time to do some forensics. One thing, Jake, that really impresses me about your firm is the willingness to put on the table for the client, just to make sure that everything is seen through to the end, is this idea of coring. Talk to us, if you could, and for the listeners out there, about your experiences as it relates to kind of now showtime and kind of proof is in the pudding as you core through what it is you just injected.
Absolutely. So we like to core through the wall on 2 different occasions. We core through the wall prior to the application. That tells us really what we have on the backside of the wall. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you're looking at as-built and they're showing a waterproofing system back behind that wall. It's key to verify. You need to know if that waterproofing system is currently fully adhered, or if it's displaced, or if it's not even there and you're going into soil. So traditionally we core through the wall prior to our first application, and traditionally we try to hit about 100 to 150 square feet of the worst location on any foundation wall. So when we walk through, we look for the largest leaks possible.
Good.
The reason that we do that is, one, you always want to make sure that you can achieve success in the worst location possible. But two, traditionally, there's the most potential for soil erosion back behind that wall. So we're also going to have the potential for cavity, right? So that's going to give us the worst case scenario for the amount of grout we're placing behind the wall.
Yeah.
And that carries down the road to the owner and giving them an honest assessment of what you think it's going to cost. Because I'd much rather look at the owner at the end of a project and say, hey, we used 80 gallons less than anticipated. Port placement, we reduced the port placement, we're doing phenomenal. Yep. So once we get that core, we have a very good idea of what's going on behind the wall. Then we'll come through, we'll place the grout, we get everything cured out, and we come back and we do a couple random core samples. The goal traditionally is to get it as centered away from the ports as possible, because that's truly going to tell you that you had that overlap in the grout from port to port.
Yes.
We'll punch a 2-inch core through that wall, and the goal is to bring the core back through with the grout fully adhered to the concrete for ownership to see that the placement was achieved, and it was achieved in the hardest to access location because it's as far away from the surrounding ports as possible.
Yep. Yeah, you're getting that travel. You're demonstrating a whole host of things there, Jake. Adhesion, travel. That's great. That's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I think that's a lot, because it's one thing to say what something's going to do and even demonstrating your port-to-port travel, but when you can go in and destructively, in a clean way, albeit, get what you've done and take a cross-section for proof, there's no better, in my humble opinion anyway. So I appreciate that. Jake, you've done a phenomenal job on touching some of the technical aspects of mockups. Again, it's been a pleasure having you on board this morning and talking about the value of mockups and how to go about doing a blindside injection mockup. So important to be able to get everything out in the open early, have transparency on the project, and establish that trust with the client. Jake, I want to thank you again on behalf of all of us here and listeners out there. You've received some very good expert analysis and technical explanation this morning from Jake Holland at Summit Sealants. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the day, Jake. Appreciate having you on the show.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
You bet. Bye-bye now.